Good morning. It's about 6:30 a.m. on Tuesday, um, December 28th, 2023. Been up for a few hours, couldn't sleep. The sun is still not even peaking over in the east, but I thought this would be a perfect time to read this book to you. This is Anna and the Sun, or The Ballad the Stars Remembered, by Mark W. Lewis, my favorite entertainer of all time, our Renaissance Fair shaman, Dirty Jack. He signed it to me. I treasure this so much, more than any other book in my library. Anna and the Sun, or The Ballad the Stars Remember, a myth from Mark W. Lewis. For Colleen, my balance, my wife, and the light of my life. A note from the author. This story is set in the time of wonder. It takes place in a valley. As in all good valleys, there are the eastern mountains, the west mountains, and the mountains at the head of the valley, and the ocean at the fourth side. If you were to catch a glimpse of the people of this valley at their work or play, or at their meals, they would look as though they had just stepped out of a Bruegel painting, all earth-colored and peasanty. Now please open yourself to the magic, and enjoy this myth from my muse and me to you. The sun would rise and set, and the stars would come out and accompany night as he walked among the sleeping trees. The people would close their days and relax until sleep would come and carry them into the lands of their choice. But Anna would stay awake and sing a lullaby to the sun as he lay down to rest. At times she would stay and talk with Night until he stepped over the mountains at the top of the valley and headed home. She would then sing songs of love and praise to wake the sun and bring him to her. Pick me up and take me, I will go. Pick me up and take me, I will go. I need your strength and love to feel. The sprocket fits and turns the wheel. My love calls out, I can't conceal, so pick me up and take me, I will go. She loved him very much. The people of the town thought this young girl mad to reach out to the sun. They knew that he would always be there to help them work in their fields and vineyards. On their way to work they would pass by and laugh at her as she stood on the small hill behind her house and sang to him. They would mock her and question her, but always she would remain silent. She felt she need not explain to someone who wouldn't try to understand. One morning, as the sun sat on the east hills before beginning his long climb to the noon, he looked down into the valley. The townspeople were busily hitching their wagons and gathering their tools for the day's work. He stood up, content, and began to walk when something caught his eye. He sent one of his brightest rays to find what he had seen. The light ran down and revealed a young girl singing. He recognized her voice, and the piece fell into the puzzle that it was this mortal girl who had been waking him so beautifully. He sent his finest colors down to her as a thank you, and when they reached her, they bounced off her long chestnut brown hair and woke up the flowers. Anna realized that her far love had recognized her, and she began to dance and sing more beautifully. The sun was very flattered that such a beautiful girl would pay so much attention to him. He smiled as he continued his climb. Later, when the sun was about ready to drop down behind the western mountains, he heard her voice again and was so pleased with her song that he painted the clouds with his finest evening colors for her. Planting time came and passed, and the sun found himself looking forward to seeing this mortal in the mornings, and disappointed when, his sky painting done, he would have to leave her singing. One morning, while he stood on the hills and stretched, he looked down to find her. There she danced, singing her love. He smiled and started to walk when slowly a strange pain began to creep into his heart. It was a very good pain. He stopped, looked down to her again, and she blew him a kiss. His heart jumped, and the door swung open. I'm going to relight my candle here that I just blew out. He looked down to her again, and she blew him a kiss. His heart jumped, and the door swung open. He looked once more, and then he couldn't look away. A young maiden in a long diaphanous gown with flowers in her hair entered and closed the door behind her. The son had fallen in love with a mortal. Love had settled into his heart. All that day he kept his gaze on her, and she would dance and sing to him. The sun began to wake earlier than usual and to stay up longer so that he could be with her. All the light hurt Night's eyes, so finally Night just shut himself into his dark castle and wouldn't come out. Anna was in her element. She would sit on the small hill behind the house and catch the sunbeams the sun would send to her. She would laugh and sing to him the hero songs of old. The sun already knew the stories of which she was singing because he had seen the deeds being done. But he loved her, and he loved her voice. She would sleep in his light, and her skin was turning the warm brown color of her hair. The sun called together all the winds to accompany him as he sang a song he had composed for her. Sing me the ballads the stars can remember. Tell me the hero stories of old, the taste of the colors you see in November. Come here and watch while my love I unfold. Tell me the innermost thoughts of a sparrow. Trying to see how high he can go. What is the message the water keeps whispering, falling from heaven the ocean to flow? Your hair glows in colors of springtime through autumn. My castle day memories pass in review. I see in your smile the style of a woman. A little child laughs from behind eyes of blue. Lonely echoes quickly die, telling of days and ships gone by. Gray cat smiling, seagull flying, underlying harmonies please. And she loved him. The townspeople became very upset and worried because the sun would not set. All of the crops began to dry out, and the vines couldn't retain any moisture. A meeting was called in the guild hall to decide what to do. The burgomaster called together the town elders to report on what was causing this disaster. It was decided that Anna was the cause of this curse. They decided that she was some sort of evildoer and was trying to destroy them because she never spoke to them and remained alone. A plan was decided upon to capture her. Anna was sitting and watching her love chasing clouds with the west wind, and she was laughing at him being so beautifully foolish. The sun had waded out waist deep into the ocean with his back to her when a group of men rode up at full gallop. They grabbed her, gagged her, and threw her into a chariot. They tied her arms around the driver so that she wouldn't fall out, and rode off toward the town. She had tried to call to him, but they had surprised her. The sun finally caught the cloud he had been chasing and poured all of his colors over the top of it so they would drip down through. When he turned to give it to her, he saw her riding away with her arms around another man. He went numb, and his knees felt weak. The cloud floated out of his hands as he stared in disbelief. Suddenly anger ran up and enveloped the sun in his yellowed arms. The sun grabbed the cloud and tore it into a million mists. Jealousy and heartbreak rushed at him from below the earth and attached themselves to him. Jealousy surrounded his head in a green mist. Heartbreak sat on his chest and stuck needle-like fingernails into his heart. A gaunt and skeletal Fear strolled up and whispered horrible thoughts into his ears, and Remorse climbed on his back and grinned. Their weight forced the sun to sit down on the western mountains, and he began to cry. Anguish came running across the fields towards him. As the sun let out a long wail of sadness, Anguish struck, penetrated, and drove into the sun's heart, forcing love into a corner. The impact of Anguish toppled the sun over the mountains, and he fell down the other side. As he stood up, anger and jealousy covered his eyes, and he stumbled and fell many times before, bruised and bleeding, he reached his palace. He locked himself in the innermost chamber and began to cry. Fear and Remorse stood at the outside gates to guard the palace. Jealousy and Heartbreak took their positions inside the chambers so that they could stay close and remind him. Anguish settled into the sun's heart and made himself quite comfortable. With the sun gone, Night came rushing out of his castle and ran over the countryside. And Anna cried. The people rejoiced in that their plan had succeeded. They had conquered the sun. They held a huge celebration and gave Night the chair of honor, with his son Twilight at his right, and his servant Sleep standing behind him to do his every bidding. The town laughed and danced and sang far into Night's arms. When everyone had drunk his fill and then some, Night motioned for Sleep to take over the festivities. He began to sing the Saga of Somnolence. Close your eyes, surrender. Drift like leaves in fall, snowflakes in December. Hear the night winds call, down, 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 down. When all had surrendered to Sleep's song, Night kicked back his chair, threw back his head, and began to laugh. And Anna sat and cried. When the town finally awoke up and began to prepare for work, they noticed that there wasn't that familiar glow over the East Mountains as in the past. Thinking that their inner clocks had unwound because of the festivities, they all came back to Sleep. He gathered them into his arms and assured them that everything was all right. Upon awakening again, the people discovered that Night was still standing over the town, laughing. He was very pleased that he was able to stay on Earth longer than usual. He began to play tricks on the people, being a mischievous creature. He sent mists and dreams to assume the shapes of dragons or headless spirits walking among the houses. Night laughed, and Anna lay in her bed and cried. The sun was staying in his palace, and he wouldn't come out. His love had left him, and he was alone. He was dimming, losing his glow. Anguish kept him company, and jealousy would keep peeking in to see if he was still upset. The sun would cry for long hours. His tears made golden rivers that ran into the rocks and solidified. Anguish was being fed by jealousy, fear, and remorse from the storerooms of the sun's palace. He had grown to where he had overpowered the little lady love in the sun's heart and had forced her into a corner. The sun's heart was bursting. He longed for Anna very much. Knight's pranks became more malicious as time went on, because he was tired of being around all the time, and also irritable because he couldn't get any sleep. The townspeople were frightened, and many were being hurt from running blindly from Knight's henchmen. Finally Knight called together all the mists, dreams, and spirits, and held the mass of confusion in the huge Gothic hall within the castle. Knight sat at the pipe organ at the end of the hall, and the music fell into the darkness and smothered the people. A small circle of demons began to dance in the center of the hall, with all of the rest watching. As the tempo began to increase, more and more shapes joined the dance. Soon the entire haunted assemblage was involved, swirling and blending in the eerie glow of the torches. This awful maelstrom began to give birth to an even greater evil. As the music grew harder and harder, a shape lifted its head from the moving mass, and the rest of the spirits ran to take part. It was a horse of massive proportion, the worst of dreams, the dreaded spectre Nightmare. With burning red eyes, this phantom tore itself up from the mass which had spawned it, punctuating its struggling movements with ghastly shrieks. At the crescendo, with music screaming out of every window, the gates of Knight's castle burst open, and Nightmare, with Knight astride his back, leapt across the threshold and stood poised motionless for a moment. Within the translucent contours of the horse's muscular body could be seen all of the specters that were part of the whole, screeching and reaching, screaming a human scream. Screaming a human scream. Nightmare lunged away from the castle and flooded down the hills into the town. As it reached the city, its tail would crack like a whip, and with each snap, an incubus or demon would leap free from the hole and run into its own part of the town. This ghoul was infecting the village, spreading a pestilence of fear and evil. No one knew or understood what was happening. Anna had been kept locked in the wine cellar of Guild Hall. Without her love, and knowing she had been fooled, and knowing he had been fooled, she pined away. She would eat nothing and became terribly ill. She was dying. Her brother Matthew was worried about her. He knew all that had happened because he sat with her every night and listened to her cry for her love. Matthew decided that he would set out and tell the son what had happened. He knew that Anna would try to stop him from going, so quietly he left her, packed a rucksack with provisions, and saddled his horse. He rode out of the town to their house and took Courage, their father's sword, down from over the hearth. The inscription on the blade read, "All enemies bow to Courage." It was a beautiful sword, and on its pommel was a carved face which took on the likeness of the previous owner. The face's beard wound down the grip to where it intertwined with the crossguard. When all was made ready, he hung the sword at his side and set out on his quest. Knight saw him leaving and sent a small group of warriors to hinder him. The evils came swooping down on him, their bodies stretching into even more grotesque shapes as they rushed through the air towards him. But when they saw that he had Courage by his side, they stopped dead in their tracks and vanished. His travels were easy until he reached the Western Mountains. He would have turned back many times because of the height and lack of light, but he was able to grasp Courage by the hilt, and it would whisper to him and encourage him onward. When Matthew reached the summit of the Western Mountains, he found a bearded old man sitting by a fire near the path. He was resting against a huge bag that he had been carrying and had just laid down. Matthew offered him a drink of wine from his leather-covered bottle and asked him directions to the sun's palace. The old man looked up at Matthew with the eyes of a child, smiled, pointed the direction, and asked his purpose. Matthew dismounted and explained over supper, and the old man's eyes flashed with excitement. The Ancient One reached into his bag and pulled out a large package wrapped in oilskin and bound in twine. He handed it to Matthew, saying, "This will help you in your quest." The twine was quickly cut, and as the oilskin was pulled back, it revealed a slightly tarnished breastplate, the matching backplate, and a coat of chainmail. Matthew immediately recognized them as the laureled mail of patience and the armor of youth. He quickly put them on to a perfect fit. As he fastened the straps, his arms brushed across the tarnished surface of the breastplate. With these motions, he was unconsciously removing the patina that had collected over the many years that the armor had lain idle. From his bag, the old one handed Matthew the helmet of wisdom, which, when he put it on, was a shade too big for him, but he cinched the strap of learning tight, and it fit well. "You are going to need more than just courage to achieve your goal," said the old one, as a tear ran down his cheek, remembering how well it had fit him once. The knowledge of the armor filled Matthew as he mounted his horse. He was an impressive figure of a man to begin with, and now all of the virtues of the armor realized themselves in him. He took the old man's hand and thanked him. As Matthew turned to go, the old man kept hold of his hand with a grip of surprising strength and turned him back to face him. The old man looked at Matthew and said, "This is my advice to you, and remember what I say. Never cast a shadow, always a reflection." Not fully understanding the meaning of the words, Matthew nodded and rode off down the road toward the sun's palace. The old man watched Matthew ride until his form was swallowed by the darkness. He turned, put out his fire, and shouldered his bag, pleased by the reduction in weight. Looking back in the direction which Matthew had gone, he nodded his head and smiled the smile of a father. Then turning, he walked up into the mists of the mountain and disappeared. When Matthew reached the sun's palace, he dismounted and walked straight up to the outer gates. Like a pair of sodden bookends, fear and remorse were lying against the gatehouses, sleeping off the wine they had just drunk. Drawing his sword, Matthew slew remorse in his sleep. Fear here heard the sword pass through his friend and awoke to the sight of Matthew standing in front of him with the blood of remorse dripping from his sword. Jumping to his feet, Fear began to assume a different shape. His thin, frail, bony body began to spread. Muscles began to form and firm. Hair began to grow all over his body. His eyes widened to the size of a child's head, with one ugly slit as each pupil. His nose elongated, and an unctuous beard grew from his bony chin. He stood 50 feet tall, and the claws that were his hands ripped an oak tree out of the ground and raised it above his head. He began to laugh hideously and gnashed his spear teeth. His pupils dilated, and an eerie glow poured out as he rushed at Matthew. With courage in his hand, Matthew braced himself and then leapt forward to meet the charge. The creature, startled at being attacked, lost his balance and stumbled. Matthew saw him fall toward him, and holding his sword in both hands, he drove it squarely into the monster's chest and jumped to the side. Screaming with pain, the creature fell at his feet, and with one blow, Matthew severed the head from the body. Before the echo of the scream had fled over the hills, Matthew was through the gate, leaving the thin, frail, bony body of Fear lying headless in the dust. On hearing the scream, heartbreak and jealousy ran for their lives, leaving the inner gates wide open, and Matthew slapped them with the broadside of his sword as they rushed past him. Matthew ran to the sun's chamber and kicked the door open. Startled, the sun jumped up, and his glow brightened. Anguish fell out of the sun's heart, and shot at Matthew to conquer him. But the reflection of the sun's brightness off the recently rubbed surface of the breastplate blinded him. He glanced off Matthew and struck the wall. Matthew grabbed Anguish in his gloved fist and crushed the life out of him. With all of the guards gone, the sun was ready to listen to what Matthew had to say. Anna lay alone in her cellar cell. She had one window, a half-round portal at street level with bars crossing it. From this low vantage point, she watched as nightmare ravaged the town. She could see groups of terrified townspeople being chased and herded by 2 or 3 ghosts and demons. Evil dreams and specters were looting the houses and shops and were carrying away huge loads of clothing and valuables. And through it all, Nightmare would run through the streets, sparks flying from its hooves. There were fires burning everywhere, casting an orange and yellow pall over the horror. Many buildings had already surrendered to the flames. The frightened people came to Anna and pleaded with her to bring the sun back to them. She was so weak that even if she had wanted to, she couldn't have told them. She only asked that she be carried to her favorite place, the small hill behind her house, so that she could die happily. Since her brother hadn't returned and her love had been forced away, she had nothing to live for. The people did as she had requested and took her to the hill. As she lay back to die, she poured every remaining ounce of her life into her voice as she sang her once happy song. Pick me up and take me, I will go. Oh, oh, oh. Pick me up and take me, I will go. Oh, oh, oh. I need your strength and love to feel. The sprocket fits and turns the wheel. My love calls out, I can't conceal. So pick me up and take me, I will go. The deepness of your feelings I must know. Oh, oh, oh. The deepness of your feeling I must know. Oh, oh, oh. The time of capture far behind, the threat of losing now benign. A whispered clue I must go find. So pick me up and take me, I will go. As she lay back, the townspeople crowded around themselves and whispered to one another, saying, "Who's she talking to? What is she saying? I don't understand." They all became silent as she lifted herself up to one elbow and sang for the last time. When you are gone and night walks through, he whispers secrets trite but true. My love calls out, but I need you to hold my love in warm, soft blue. So pick me up and take me. I will. As she lay back to die, over in the East Mountains, the sun kicked open the gates of morning and came riding up into the sky, with Matthew riding right beside him. Night saw them coming, reined in on Nightmare, and tried to run. Matthew rode straight for him, grabbed him, and threw him off his mount to the ground. With its master gone, Nightmare began to disintegrate from the hindquarters forward. The spirits fled from its form and ran back into the shadows, under rocks, over to the trees, and around the corners. The evil horse watched itself falling away and began to scream. The shrieks grew louder and louder as its end drew nearer. As the last spirit jumped away from the horse's brow, the burning eyes and the screams vanished, and it was gone. No one who was there knows exactly what happened. The facts that can be boiled out of the soup of exaggeration are that as the sun rose, Anna was surrounded in a bluish aura. She was lifted up out of her mortal body, dressed in a long, flowing, iridescent white gown. As she ascended, she was wrapped in a veil of stars which extended the entire length of the heavens. Soon she was nothing but a soft, glowing sphere of light in the western sky. Her love had rescued her. Now she would rule the night forever, as her king rules the day. She always faces him, and once every 28 days, she visits her love in his palace.